Hello, everyone. Today, my teammates and I are going to talk on the topic carbon dioxide fertilization effects. What is carbon dioxide fertilization effect? Carbon dioxide fertilization effect, in short CFE, is a phenomena that the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increases the rate of photosynthesis in plants. The carbon dioxide fertilization effect is a process that acts as a negative feedback in the climate system. Carbon dioxide can be the constraining factor, limiting the photosynthesis process. And increasing light intensity and abundant water availability will have no effect on the rate of photosynthesis if there's insufficient supply of carbon dioxide. If more carbon dioxide and other input factors are available in abundance, the photosynthesis process would be scaled up, enhancing the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide sequestered by plants. This slide talks about the process of photosynthesis. Through photosynthesis, green leaves uses energy from sunlight to chemically combine carbon dioxide absorbed from the air with water and nutrients stepped from the ground to produce sugars, which are the main source of food, fiber, and fuel for life on Earth. On the side, you can see a diagram of the process of photosynthesis. Chlorophyll absorbs green wavelengths from the sun, making plants look green. This chlorophyll they're present inside the leaf. Light energy, which plants use to chemically combine carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients. Carbon dioxide, it enters through the stomata, an opening in the leaf's epidermis and cuticle. As you can see here, water is absorbed through the roots and carried through the stem to the rest of the plants. A plant roots replaces water lost during transpiration. Water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight combine in the leaf to make sugar. Here, oxygen is being released. Oxygen and water vapor exit the leaf through the stomata. Water lost from the leaf is called transpiration, and excess sugar is stored as starch in the roots. Effects of carbon dioxide fertilization. The fertilization effect of increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration causes the increase of vegetation productivity, which leads to the earth getting greener. This is due to the fact that as more carbon dioxide are in the air, more sugars in plant leaves are produced, which causes plant growth. A greener Earth has a larger terrestrial carbon sink.
Let's talk about dynamics of CFE, carbon fertilization effect. By dynamics, I mean if the effectiveness of CFE is weakening or strengthening. Right? To assess this, the beta factor is introduced in our paper. So what is beta factor? The beta factor is an increase in gross primary production, GPP, relative to an increase in atmospheric CO2. Gross primary production is the total amount of carbon compounds, like sugars, produced by photosynthesis of plants in an ecosystem in a given period of time, in our case, over the year. So basically what that means is that if beta factor is positive, if it's increasing, the effectiveness of carbon fertilization effect is also increasing. And if it's negative, then the opposite is the true. Generally, the beta factor is increasing over the globe. We can see this on the map. This is the key takeaway of Wang et al.'s paper, Recent Global Decline of CO2 Fertilization Effects on Vegetation Photosynthesis. So, overall, the CO2 is becoming less effective at increasing GPP. There are, of course, spatial differences of beta factor decrease. Most of the vegetation on the globe experiences decrease in beta factor on around 86% of land. And what is notable is that the decrease of beta factor is slightly higher in colder regions than in tropical areas. There are certain regions like Southeast Asia, East Australia, North America, where the beta factor is actually increasing, and this is likely caused by the intensified farming of crops or atmospheric nutrient deposition, which is basically when nutrients from atmosphere are stored and get into the soil. So let's look closely on the actual data of the beta factor decrease. There were two main data types, data sets that were used in this paper. The first one came from satellite data that looked at chlorophyll fluorescence, which is basically when plants absorb sunlight, then they then emit wavelengths of red or far red spectrum, which are then captured by satellites. This data shows a robust decrease in beta factor across different vegetation types and climate zones at about minus 0.92% yearly. However, the data shown by several carbon cycle models, which is the second source, that solely considered CO2 effect, showed a smaller decrease in beta factor, ranging from minus 0.06% to minus 0.21% yearly. Why is this the case? There are two main hypotheses for declining beta factor. The first one, the plant productivity is constrained by nutrient limitations and imbalances. It aims to explain the general decrease in beta factor. And the second one is the carbon cycle models do not account for changes in water availability, which explains the divergence of data from satellites and carbon cycle models. Let's talk about the first hypothesis first. Overall, there's a global decline in nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations in soil. There's a positive correlation between decrease in beta factor and decrease of these nutrients. For example, regions with less concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus showed larger decrease in beta factor. Transitioning to the second hypothesis, satellite data shows a stronger decrease in beta factor in certain areas, which are arid, temperate, and dry tropical regions. Those regions are highly sensitive to water storage, and satellite data reflects that. It's highly sensitive to water storage. What it means that if the water availability is low, if the water is scarce, then the satellite data shows a stronger decrease in beta factor. However, carbon cycle models do not show such trend. They do not account for water availability because in reality water isn't available universally, and carbon cycle models fail to show that.
So to summarize the carbon fertilization effect, it is the effect of CO2 on photosynthesis at the leaf level. One thing it does is stimulate carboxylation, which is one step in the Calvin cycle, so that an increased supply of CO2 directly accelerates photosynthesis. But this effect is importantly regulated by the amount of nutrients available, specifically nutrients that are nitrogen and phosphorus. Secondly, it increases water use efficiency, but this is also related to the water availability. And because there appears to be growing limitations in both nutrients and available water around the Earth, the overall CFE effect is showing a declining trend. And if these declining trends prevail across the globe, the terrestrial vegetation carbon sink response to increasing CO2 will decrease. Why we should care about this is that this implies a weakening negative feedback on the climatic system and a reduced efficacy of land-based climate mitigation. And this means we need to factor this into our future climate budget. This photo here is of our climate budget. And as you can see, the green area is the amount of carbon that is uptaken by the land terrestrial carbon sink. So carbon fertilization effect accounts for 60% of the terrestrial carbon sink, and with a less effective carbon sink, we will need to find other ways to manage the increased amount of carbon dioxide and prevent further climate warming. Net terrestrial uptake is one of the biggest uncertainties for our global carbon budget, especially because of land use change, which essentially means changing natural land or forested land into land used for agricultural use or urbanization. So one solution is that we can adopt optimal land management practice strategies because land use is so important. So optimal land management practices involve removing negative human-related disturbances in naturally vegetated areas or applying human-intervened programs and practices that can improve vegetation productivity or restore previously degraded vegetation. And one example is protecting trees that are growing nearby road networks. The carbon gap is the difference between carbon sequestration if we implement optimal land management or if we don't. And this map shows in areas that are darker green that there is a larger carbon gap where more effective land use can improve the amount of carbon sequestration. And so you can see that it's definitely darker around urban areas and highly populated areas. The authors find that if we better use our land, we can reduce the EU's fossil carbon emissions by 28 to 31%, which already compensates more than half of its nationally determined contributions target. Overall, we should continue to pay attention to how our terrestrial carbon sink has ameliorated the effects of our carbon emissions, but also recognize that as this effect of CFE shows, it will not be able to keep up, and we need to improve our own human-driven mitigation efforts before the efforts needed to tackle climate change are exacerbated even more.